Sit in the back, my wife commanded at her law school graduation party. Her family pretended I didn't even exist. My Secret Service detail arrived for protection. When they saw the presidential seal, my wife's diploma fell from her hands. So there I was, standing in the middle of what should have been one of the proudest moments of my life, watching my wife, freshly minted Harvard law graduate, summa cum laude, future partner at some disgustingly prestigious firm, absolutely glow under those perfectly positioned amber lights that made everyone look like they'd been dipped in liquid gold. The venue was one of those places that screams, "We have money and we're not subtle about it," with its vaulted ceilings, crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than my car, and waiters in bow ties who looked like they'd judge you for using the wrong fork. Her parents had rented out the entire ballroom of the Copley Plaza because apparently celebrating at a normal restaurant like Peasants wasn't an option for the Sullivan family. The champagne was flowing like someone had struck bubbly oil. People were giving speeches that sounded like they'd been rehearsed in front of mirrors for weeks, and every single person in that room was positioned at just the right angle for maximum Instagram story potential. I'm talking professional lighting, people. The kind of setup that makes everyone look like they've never had a pore in their entire lives. My wife, let's call her Claire, because that's her actual name, and honestly, she doesn't deserve anonymity at this point, was working that room like a politician at a fundraiser, air-kissing cousins she'd ignored for years and laughing at jokes that weren't even remotely funny with a practiced perfection that would have made Miss America jealous. I was right there beside her, dutiful husband, supportive partner, all those buzzwords that marriage counselors love to throw around. I'd even worn the navy suit she'd picked out for me 3 weeks ago, the one she said made me look presentable enough for her family, which I'm pretty sure was code for, "Please don't embarrass me." I'd smiled through the ceremony, clapped until my hands hurt, and nodded enthusiastically through her father's speech about how his little girl was going to change the world one billable hour at a time. I was playing my role perfectly, or so I thought. That's when it happened. We'd just walked through those oversized mahogany doors into the party, and the room erupted in applause like she'd just won an Oscar instead of a law degree that half the people in that room had also acquired at some point in their lives. But hey, when you're a Sullivan, everything you do is groundbreaking, apparently. Claire turned to me with that smile. You know the one. The smile that looks warm and loving from the outside, but has the emotional temperature of a meat locker when you're actually the recipient, and leaned in close like she was about to whisper something sweet. Maybe, "I love you," or "I'm so glad you're here," or even just "thanks for coming," which would have been the bare minimum of human decency. Instead, she whispered, "Sit in the back." 3 words. That's all it took. 3 words delivered with such casual cruelty that I actually had to replay them in my head to make sure I'd heard correctly. Sit in the back. Like I was her Uber driver who'd accidentally followed her inside and needed to be gently redirected to my proper place in the pecking order, somewhere between the coat check girl and the guy refilling the ice buckets. The crazy thing? She said it sweetly, with that same smile still plastered on her face, so to anyone watching, it probably looked like she was saying something adorable in couple Y. But I heard it. I felt it. And judging by the approving nods from her parents who were standing close enough to catch it, they heard it too. Her father, Richard Sullivan III, because of course there's a the third involved, gave me this look that wasn't quite a smirk, but wasn't not a smirk either. It was that special kind of condescending expression that rich people perfect over generations of looking down at everyone who isn't in their tax bracket. Her mother, Patricia, who'd never once called me by my actual name in the 5 years I'd been married to her daughter, and instead referred to me as Claire's husband, like I was an accessory she'd picked up at Nordstrom, actually smiled and patted my shoulder like I was a golden retriever who'd just learned to sit on command. Her uncles, a collection of lawyers and investment bankers who all looked like they'd been manufactured in the same factory that produces politicians and game show hosts, pretended not to notice the interaction at all, which somehow felt worse than if they'd openly laughed. And her cousins? Oh man, her cousins were the worst. They looked right through me like I was made of glass, or maybe like I was that weird stain on the wall that everyone notices, but nobody wants to acknowledge out loud. I could have spontaneously combusted right there on the Italian marble floor, and I'm pretty sure they would have just stepped over my ashes to get to the shrimp cocktail. So I did what I was told, because that's what I'd been doing for the past 5 years of this marriage. following orders, staying in my lane, being the supportive husband who knew his place. I grabbed one of those wobbly metal folding chairs from the stack near the kitchen doors, the kind they use for overflow seating when they run out of the actual nice chairs, and I set up my little kingdom right there next to the swinging doors that kept banging every time a waiter rushed through with another tray of overpriced appetizers. My throne was positioned beautifully between a tower of extra folding chairs that hadn't made the cut for the main seating area and a plate of leftover meatballs that someone had abandoned on the service station, probably because they were cold and congealing into little spheres of sadness. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. This was my spot for the evening, my designated zone in the back row of my own wife's celebration, where I could watch the Sullivan family orbit around their newest star while I sat there like a piece of forgotten luggage. The view was spectacular. I could see everything and everyone, which meant I got to watch in high definition as person after person approached Claire with congratulations, hugs, and that special kind of enthusiastic praise that people reserve for those they think are going to be important someday. Meanwhile, I was camped out next to the kitchen like I was waiting for someone to ask me to bus tables. A waiter nearly knocked me over twice in the first 10 minutes, apologizing quickly both times before disappearing back into the kitchen chaos. The DJ's bass speaker was positioned roughly 3 feet from my head, so every time he dropped a beat, my entire skeleton vibrated like I was sitting on top of a subwoofer. My plastic cup of soda, because apparently I didn't rate actual glassware, shook so hard it looked like it was having a seizure. And every few minutes, someone would approach me, squinting in the dim lighting of the back area, and ask me if I knew where the bathrooms were, or if there were more napkins, or, and this one really killed me, whether I was with the catering company. No, I'd say with my best attempt at a smile, I'm actually the husband. And they'd look confused for a second, like they were trying to reconcile the idea that the Harvard Law graduate's husband was sitting in what was essentially the staff section, before nodding awkwardly and backing away like they'd just stumbled into something uncomfortable that they didn't want to be part of. But I sat there anyway, because what else was I going to do? Make a scene? Storm out? Demand better treatment at my wife's graduation party like some kind of entitled child? No, I'd learned a long time ago that with the Sullivans, you play by their rules or you don't play at all. So I sat in my folding chair, ate a couple of those sad meatballs because nobody else was going to, and watched my wife shine in the spotlight while I occupied the shadows like a prop that had been placed just out of frame. From my prime location in the back row, seriously, I had a better view of the kitchen's industrial dishwasher than I did of my own wife. I got to observe the Sullivan family ecosystem in all its champagne-soaked, self-congratulatory glory. And let me tell you, watching this family operate was like watching a nature documentary about some exotic species of wealthy mammals who'd evolved specifically to make everyone around them feel inadequate. They moved in packs. They spoke in a language composed entirely of name drops and humble brags. And they had this uncanny ability to make even the most successful person in the room feel like they should be taking notes. Claire's dad, Richard Sullivan III. Yes, we're still using the full title because apparently 2 Richards before him weren't enough. Had positioned himself at the center of the largest cluster of guests, holding court like some kind of legal royalty. The man was in his element, gesturing with his whiskey glass in a way that probably cost more than most people's car payments, going on and on about our brilliant daughter, and how she was already being fast-tracked to the partner track at his firm. Never mind that she literally graduated 4 hours ago and hadn't even passed the bar yet. In Richard's version of reality, Claire was already arguing cases in front of the Supreme Court and probably curing cancer in her spare time. The youngest associate we've ever brought on with this kind of trajectory, he boomed, loud enough that I could hear him perfectly over the bass that was currently rearranging my internal organs. Harvard Law Review, top 5% of her class, and she's got the Sullivan instinct for the jugular. That's what separates the good lawyers from the great ones, knowing exactly when to strike. He made a cutting motion with his hand that was apparently supposed to look decisive, but mostly just looked like he was karate chopping an invisible opponent. The crowd around him nodded like he'd just revealed the secrets of the universe instead of basically saying his daughter was good at arguing, which, let's be real, isn't exactly a rare trait in lawyers. And the sycophants ate it up. Every single word. They laughed at his jokes that weren't jokes. They gasped at his stories they'd probably heard a dozen times before. and they agreed with every statement like he was reading from some kind of legal gospel. "Richard, you must be so proud," someone said, and I watched him do this false modesty thing where he waved his hand dismissively while simultaneously puffing his chest out like a peacock who'd just won Best in Show. Meanwhile, Claire's mother Patricia was holding her own court about 15 feet away, surrounded by a gaggle of her country club friends who all had that same perfectly maintained appearance that comes from having a standing appointment with a team of professionals whose entire job is to make sure you never look a day over 45, regardless of your actual age. She was laughing, and I mean really laughing, like someone had just told the funniest joke in human history, at something Marcus Whitmore was saying. Marcus was this associate at Richard's firm, one of those lawyer types who probably practiced his casual laugh in the mirror and had his suits tailored to make him look like he was constantly on his way to close a Fortune 500 merger. The guy was such a tryhard that I'm pretty sure his business cards had his business cards. And then I told the judge. Marcus was saying, pausing for effect like he was performing Shakespeare. "Your Honor, with all due respect, my client's constitutional rights aren't a suggestion." Patricia absolutely lost it, laughing so hard that I genuinely worried she might hyperventilate right there on the parquet floor. Her friends joined in, clutching their champagne flutes and dabbing at their eyes with cocktail napkins like Marcus had just delivered the punchline of the century instead of basically repeating something every first-year law student learns in week 1. "Oh, Marcus, you're absolutely brilliant," Patricia gushed, touching his arm in that way that rich older women do when they're letting younger men know they approve of their existence. "Claire is so lucky to be working with minds like yours. You'll have to mentor her, show her the ropes." She said this like Claire hadn't just spent 3 years at Harvard Law, like she was some kind of helpless intern who needed a big, strong man to explain how doors work. From my folding chair throne, I watched this circus unfold with the kind of detached fascination usually reserved for watching reality TV shows about people whose problems include things like, "My yacht is the wrong shade of white." The Sullivan family and their orbiting satellites of lawyers, bankers, and various other professionals who all seemed to own summer homes with names were buzzing around that ballroom like champagne-drunk bees, each one trying to out-prestige the others with stories about their latest accomplishments, their kids' accomplishments, or their accomplishments by proxy through people they knew. And where did I fit into all of this? Well, let me paint you a picture. Every time someone's gaze accidentally swept over my corner of the room, I could see the moment of confusion in their eyes, like they were trying to figure out if I was supposed to be there or if I'd wandered in from a completely different event. When they actually acknowledged my existence, which wasn't often, but it happened, the introduction was always the same soul-crushing variation on a theme. "Oh, that's just Liam," someone would say with a dismissive wave, like I was a piece of furniture that had been there so long nobody really noticed it anymore. "He works in administration or something. Paperwork, I think." The way they said paperwork made it sound like I spent my days filing receipts in a beige cubicle somewhere, probably with a broken fluorescent light flickering overhead and a dying fern on my desk. "Administration," another person would confirm, nodding sagely like they'd just solved a minor mystery. "Something with the government, right? Like forms? Or permits? One of those things." They'd say this while already turning away, their interest in me exhausted approximately 3 seconds after it had begun. "Yeah, paperwork. Sure. Let's go with that. Let's go with the idea that I spend my days pushing papers around a desk, stapling memos, maybe organizing some filing cabinets if things get really wild. That's definitely what I do. It's not like I work in a locked room 3 levels below the White House, dealing with information so classified that most of these people would need about 17 security clearances just to know the room exists. It's not like I brief the President of the United States on matters of national security, or that my paperwork involves threat assessments from hostile foreign governments and intelligence reports that could literally change the course of international relations. Nope, I'm just Liam, the husband, the guy who does something, administration, paperwork, something boring and forgettable that doesn't require a second thought or a follow-up question. The kind of job that makes people's eyes glaze over the moment you mention it, the conversational equivalent of watching paint dry. I sat there in my folding chair, sipping my soda that was now lukewarm because the ice had melted from the bass vibrations, and watched Claire's uncle. I think his name was Douglas, or maybe Daniel, Honestly, all these guys blurred together. Tell some story about his latest real estate acquisition in Martha's Vineyard. Oceanfront, naturally. He was saying, like there was any other kind of property worth discussing. We had to outbid 3 other families, but when you see the sunset views, you understand why. Completely worth the extra $2 million. $2 million. Extra. This man had just casually mentioned dropping an amount of money that most Americans would never see in their entire lifetime. And he said it the way normal people talk about upgrading to guacamole at Chipotle. And everyone around him nodded like this was completely reasonable. Like of course you'd spend an extra $2 million for sunset views. What else would you do with your money? Invest it in index funds like some kind of peasant? Claire floated through all of this like a queen bee, stopping at each cluster of guests to accept their praise and congratulations with practiced humility that was about as genuine as a $3 bill. I watched her laugh at the right moments, touch people's arms at the right times, and say all the right things about being so grateful and so blessed, while somehow making it clear that this was all exactly what she deserved, maybe even less than what she deserved. She was working that room like a professional, and I had to admit, even from my spot in the cheap seats, she was damn good at it. Not once did she look back at me. Not once did she check to see if I was okay, if I needed anything, or if I was even still there. I could have left, walked right out of that party, and I'm pretty sure it would have taken her at least 3 hours to notice. Maybe longer if the champagne kept flowing at its current rate. But I stayed, because that's what I did. I stayed in the back, in my designated spot, watching the Sullivan Society celebrate itself with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for actual historical events, not law school graduations that happen literally thousands of times every single year. You know what's really fascinating about social hierarchies? It's not just about where you sit, it's about what you sit on. And let me tell you, the Sullivan family had turned seating arrangements into an art form that would have made medieval royalty look egalitarian by comparison. This wasn't just about proximity to the guest of honor. This was about sending a message so clear that it might as well have been written in neon lights above everyone's heads. This is your value to us, displayed in furniture form. Let me break down the seating situation for you, because honestly, it deserves its own anthropological study. Claire's grandmother, Constance Sullivan, matriarch of the family, a woman so old money that I'm pretty sure her family helped invent the concept of currency, had been given what can only be described as a throne. I'm not being dramatic here. This thing was a padded armchair upholstered in cream-colored fabric that probably cost more per square inch than my college tuition, with carved wooden arms that looked like they belonged in a museum, and a little footstool positioned perfectly in front of it, so her feet wouldn't have to touch the common floor like some kind of peasant. The chair had been positioned in a prime location with a perfect view of everything, and there was a small side table next to it holding her champagne, her reading glasses, and what looked like a little bell she could ring if she needed anything. A bell. Like we'd time-traveled back to the 19th century, and nobody had bothered to mention it to me. People literally stopped by to pay their respects to her, bending down slightly to speak to her, like she was holding court, which I guess she kind of was. "Constance, you must be so proud," they'd say, and she'd nod regally and say something about how the Sullivan legacy was continuing exactly as it should, as if Claire's law degree was less of an academic achievement and more of a genetic inevitability, like being tall or having brown eyes. And then, and this is where it gets really good, there was Biscuit. Yes, Biscuit, Claire's parents' golden retriever, a dog who had better social standing in this family than I did, was lounging on a plush pillow that looked like it had been ordered from some kind of luxury pet catalog. The pillow was positioned near Patricia's group, close enough that people could coo over him and tell Patricia what a gorgeous boy he was, which she accepted with the same gracious pride she'd shown when people complimented her daughter. The dog, the actual dog, had a pillow, a nice one, the kind with tassels on the corners and everything. Meanwhile, there I was, perched on a folding chair that wobbled every time I shifted my weight, making this alarming creaking sound that suggested it might collapse at any moment and send me sprawling across the floor in what would have been the most entertainment this party had seen all night. The chair was one of those metal monstrosities that they stack up in closets and only break out when they've run out of real furniture, the kind that leaves marks on the back of your legs and makes your butt go numb after about 15 minutes. The seat was slightly concave from years of supporting the weight of other forgotten guests at other fancy parties, and one of the legs was just a tiny bit shorter than the others. So I spent the entire evening doing this subtle rocking motion like I was on some kind of sad, stationary boat. My location was choice, really. Premium real estate. I was positioned right next to the DJ booth, which meant I got to experience every song at a volume that made my teeth rattle. The bass was so powerful that my soda cup had developed its own little dance routine, sliding around on the tiny cocktail napkin I'd placed under it in a futile attempt to prevent condensation rings. Every time the DJ dropped a beat, which was roughly every 30 seconds because apparently this was a party for people who thought, turned down for what, was the height of sophistication, my entire skeletal system vibrated like I was standing next to a rocket launch. My internal organs were getting a massage they definitely didn't ask for, and I'm pretty sure my kidneys were filing a formal complaint. The speaker was positioned at exactly head height, which I'm sure was just a coincidence and definitely not a deliberate choice by the universe to screw with me specifically. Every time there was a particularly loud moment, a bass drop, a transition between songs, or that thing DJs do where they scratch the record like they're trying to wake it up from a coma, I could feel it in my molars. My jaw was vibrating so hard that I briefly wondered if this was how I was going to lose my fillings, sitting at my wife's graduation party, getting my dental work knocked loose by an overly enthusiastic DJ who thought more volume equals more fun. But the absolute best part, and by best, I mean most soul-crushing, was the constant stream of confused guests who wandered into my corner of the ballroom and assumed I was staff. It happened so many times that I started to wonder if I should have just leaned into it and started handing out hors d'oeuvres. At least then I would have had a purpose, a reason for existing in that space beyond serving as a physical reminder of how little the Sullivan family thought of me. The first time it happened, I was about 20 minutes into my exile, trying to find a position on the folding chair that didn't make me feel like I was sitting on a medieval torture device. This guy in a suit that probably cost more than my car payment approached me, looking around with that slightly panicked expression people get when they need a bathroom at an unfamiliar venue and can't find the signs. He looked at me, looked at my position near the kitchen doors and the service area, and made what was apparently a very logical conclusion. "Hey, buddy," he said, snapping his fingers at me like I was a dog or a particularly inattentive waiter. "Where's the bathroom? I've been wandering around this place for 5 minutes." He said this with the casual entitlement of someone who'd never had to wonder if they belonged somewhere, someone who probably had people showing him to bathrooms his entire life. I looked up at him, took a long sip of my vibrating soda, and pointed down the hallway. "Third door on the left," I said confidently. And here's the thing. I had absolutely no idea if that was true. I'd never been to this venue before in my life. For all I knew, the third door on the left led to a broom closet or the kitchen or possibly a portal to Narnia. But I said it with such authority, such certainty, that he nodded gratefully and headed off in that direction without a second thought. I just wanted to feel useful, you know? Even if that usefulness was complete fiction, even if I was potentially sending this man on a wild goose chase through the Copley Plaza, at least for 30 seconds I had served a purpose beyond being the disappointing husband who worked in administration or something. It happened again about 15 minutes later. A woman in a dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent approached me while I was trying to discreetly adjust my seating position to restore blood flow to my legs. "Excuse me," she said, looking at me the way you'd look at a customer service representative. "Is there a coat check? I'm getting warm, and I'd like to leave my wrap somewhere." She thrust a fur stole at me. Actual fur, like we hadn't all collectively decided that wearing dead animals was maybe not the best look, and waited expectantly. I think it's by the entrance," I said, not taking the fur because I drew the line at becoming an actual coat rack. "There should be someone there who can help you." She looked mildly annoyed that I wasn't personally handling her coat situation, but she wandered off toward the entrance, leaving me alone with my wobbly chair and my existential crisis. Then there was the guy who asked me if we were running low on shrimp cocktail and whether I could check with the kitchen. The woman who wanted to know if the vegetarian options were clearly labeled because her daughter was vegan and apparently couldn't just look at the food herself. The elderly gentleman who asked if I could turn the music down because it was interfering with his conversation, as if I had any control over the DJ who was currently destroying my ability to hear anything above a certain frequency ever again. Each time, I answered as helpfully as I could, because what else was I supposed to do? Make a scene? Announce to each person that I was actually the husband, not the help, and watch them apologize awkwardly while backing away slowly? That seemed more exhausting than just rolling with it, just accepting that in this space, in this moment, I was basically furniture. Functional furniture, the kind you interact with briefly when you need something and then forget about immediately afterward. I sat there on my throne of shame, next to a literal dog on a luxury pillow and grandmother in her imported armchair, while the DJ systematically destroyed my hearing and random guests treated me like a particularly unhelpful information booth. And through it all, Claire was out there in the golden light, surrounded by admirers, probably not even remembering that I existed. Just when I thought the evening had reached its maximum capacity for humiliation. Like surely there was a legal limit to how much degradation one human being could experience at a single social event. The universe decided to prove me wrong in the most spectacular way possible. Because apparently sitting in the back on a day chair next to the kitchen while being mistaken for catering staff wasn't quite enough punishment for the crime of being Claire Sullivan's husband. No, the universe had saved its best shot for the toast portion of the evening. That special time when everyone gets slightly drunk enough to say what they really think while pretending it's all in good fun. The DJ finally, turned down the music to a level that didn't require me to read lips to understand human conversation, and someone clinked their glass with one of those special little spoons that rich people apparently keep on hand specifically for the purpose of making annoying tinkling sounds. The room quieted down with that expectant energy that only comes when people know they're about to hear either something incredibly heartfelt or incredibly awkward, and honestly, they're excited about both possibilities equally. Claire's brother stepped forward, and I felt my stomach drop in that way it does when you know something bad is about to happen but you're powerless to stop it. Brandon Sullivan, Harvard undergrad, Yale MBA, currently working in private equity, doing something that I'm pretty sure involves moving money around in ways that are technically legal but morally questionable, was holding a champagne flute and wearing that smirk that he'd perfected over years of being the golden boy who could do no wrong. He was in his element, standing in the center of attention, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people spend on their wedding, ready to deliver what I was absolutely certain would be a verbal gut punch wrapped in the thin veneer of brotherly love. "I'd like to make a toast," Brandon announced, his voice carrying across the ballroom with the confidence of someone who'd never been told to sit in the back of anything in his entire life. The crowd gathered closer, forming a semicircle around him with Claire at the center, glowing under the spotlight like she was accepting an Oscar. I stayed in my seat, because where the hell else was I going to go? Stand up and join them? Walk over there and position myself next to my wife like I had some kind of right to be included in the family celebration? Yeah, that ship had sailed, crashed into an iceberg, and sunk to the bottom of the ocean several hours ago. To my brilliant little sister, Brandon began, and everyone made that collective sound that crowds make when someone says something that's supposed to be sweet. "Claire, you've accomplished something that Mom and Dad have been dreaming about since you were probably 5 years old and already arguing your way out of bedtime." Polite laughter rippled through the crowd. "Harvard Law Review, top of your class. You've made us all incredibly proud. You're going to be an amazing lawyer, probably because you've been practicing on all of us for years." More laughter, slightly louder this time. Claire was beaming, soaking it all in like a plant photosynthesizing praise instead of sunlight. Then Brandon's eyes found me in the back, and I swear to God, I saw the exact moment he decided to go for the kill. His smirk widened just a fraction, and he raised his glass slightly in my direction like he was doing me some kind of favor by acknowledging my existence. "And of course," he continued, his voice taking on that tone people use when they're about to say something mean but want to pretend it's affectionate, "we should thank Liam for being so supportive of Claire's career." He paused for effect, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. "Sitting back while she takes center stage, letting her shine without trying to compete or get in the way. That takes a special kind of man, you know? A man who's secure enough to just step aside, way aside, like all the way to the back of the room aside." The room erupted in laughter. Not the polite, gentle laughter from before. This was full-throated, genuine amusement at my expense. People were actually slapping their knees, wiping tears from their eyes, turning to each other to share knowing looks that said, "Oh my God, did you hear that?" Claire's mother covered her mouth with her hand, but her eyes were crinkled with suppressed laughter. Her father had this enormous grin on his face like Brandon had just delivered the punchline of the century. Even Constance, the ancient matriarch in her throne, had a slight smile playing at the corners of her lips. Claire? She was laughing too, but trying to make it look like she wasn't, doing that thing where you cover your face with your hand and shake your head like, "Oh no, you shouldn't have said that, but you're clearly delighted that someone did." She glanced back at me, finally, acknowledgement, with this look that was supposed to be apologetic but really just looked like she was enjoying the whole thing. Like this was all just harmless fun, just some good-natured ribbing between family members, nothing to get worked up about. I sat there in my folding chair, feeling about 200 pairs of eyes on me, and had to make a split-second decision about how to react. I could get angry, storm out, make a scene that would definitely end up being the story everyone told about this party for years to come. Remember when Claire's husband completely lost it at her graduation party? So embarrassing. Or I could sit there and take it, smile weakly, nod along like I was in on the joke instead of being the joke. Or, and this was the option I went with, I could lean into it, embrace the sarcasm that had become my primary coping mechanism, and at least maintain some dignity even if I couldn't maintain any respect. I stood up slowly, making sure my wobbly chair didn't collapse under the shifting weight and add physical humiliation to the emotional kind. I raised my plastic cup, while everyone else was holding actual crystal glassware, and smiled in a way that I hoped looked good-natured but probably just looked exhausted. "Yeah," I called out, loud enough for everyone to hear over their dying laughter. Sitting back is kind of my specialty at this point. I've really perfected it. Years of practice, you know? I'm thinking about teaching a masterclass. How to be invisible while technically present. Could be a real moneymaker. I paused, letting them absorb the self-deprecating humor they were expecting. But hey, at least I get free meatballs out of the deal. They're cold and kind of rubbery, but they're free, and really, what more can a man ask for? Some people laughed, nervous laughter this time, the kind that happens when someone makes a joke, but you're not entirely sure if they're joking or having a breakdown in real time. Others looked uncomfortable, suddenly very interested in their drinks, or the ceiling, or literally anything that wasn't me. Brandon's smirk faltered for just a second, like he hadn't expected me to actually respond, let alone respond with sarcasm that matched his own. But then he recovered, raised his glass higher, and said, "To Liam, everyone," supporting from the sidelines. And everyone laughed again and drank, because that's what you do at toasts. You laugh and drink even if the toast is basically a public roasting of someone who didn't ask to be roasted. I drank too, draining my plastic cup of lukewarm soda that tasted like disappointment and citrus flavoring. The DJ must have taken that as his cue, because the music kicked back in immediately, saving everyone from the awkward silence that was threatening to settle over the room like fog. People turned back to their conversations, the moment already fading from their minds. Just another funny story about Claire's weird husband who couldn't take a hint. Claire's father was glaring at me from across the room with an expression that suggested I'd committed some kind of social faux pas by responding at all, like I was supposed to just sit there and take the abuse silently like a good little husband. Her mother was doing that fake laugh thing where she throws her head back slightly, but her eyes aren't smiling at all, and I could practically read her thoughts. Why does Claire insist on staying married to this man who doesn't even know how to be properly humiliated? And Claire, my wife, my partner, the person who'd stood next to me in front of a priest 5 years ago and promised to honor and cherish me. She was already turning back to her admirers, accepting more congratulations and more praise, the entire toast situation apparently forgotten the moment it ended. She'd laughed at the joke at my expense, she'd watched me get verbally demolished by her brother, and she'd moved on without a second thought, because in her world, in the Sullivan world, I was exactly what Brandon had called me. The guy sitting back, staying out of the way, not competing for attention because everyone knew I'd lose anyway. I sat back down in my folding chair. It creaked ominously, like it was tired of supporting my weight and my wounded pride, and stared at my empty plastic cup. Sarcasm was my coping mechanism, my defense system, the way I managed to survive in a family that treated me like I was barely worth the oxygen I consumed. Make jokes before they can hurt you. Laugh at yourself before they can laugh at you. Turn everything into comedy, so nobody notices that underneath it all, you're actually bleeding. But here's the thing about using sarcasm as a shield. Eventually, you start to wonder if that's all you are anymore. Just a collection of defensive quips and self-deprecating humor. A person who's learned to laugh at their own humiliation because the alternative is admitting how much it actually hurts. I'd gotten so good at playing the role of the supportive, stepped-back husband who didn't mind being forgotten that I'd almost forgotten I used to be someone who expected more, who thought marriage meant being partners, equals, not a supporting character in someone else's success story. The party continued around me, the music pounding, people laughing and drinking and celebrating Claire's achievement, while I sat in the back with my cold meatballs and my plastic cup and my wobbly chair that was probably going to collapse any second now, and at least give everyone one more thing to laugh about. If there's a hierarchy of humiliation, and trust me, after tonight, I was pretty sure I could write a doctoral dissertation on the subject, then what happened next was definitely in the top 3, competing strongly for the #1 position. Because it's one thing to be verbally destroyed by your wife's brother in front of a crowd of champagne-drunk lawyers. That's psychological warfare, sure, but at least it's temporary. The words fade, people forget, life moves on. But photos? Photos are forever. Photos end up in frames on mantles and in albums that get passed around at future family gatherings. Photos are evidence, permanent records of exactly where you stood in the family hierarchy, immortalized in glossy prints and digital files that will outlive us all. The photographer had been circulating through the party for the past hour, one of those professionals who costs more per hour than most people make in a day, capturing what I'm sure would be absolutely stunning images of the Sullivan family in all their well-dressed glory. She had that efficient, no-nonsense energy that professional photographers develop after years of wrangling drunk people into aesthetically pleasing arrangements. And she'd been doing a pretty good job of staying out of my corner of the room, probably because even she could sense that photographing the sad husband on the folding chair wasn't going to make it into the final album. But now it was time for the official family photos, that sacred ritual where everyone gathers together to pretend they actually like each other for the 30 seconds it takes to capture the perfect shot. The photographer started calling people over to the area she'd set up near the windows, where the lighting was apparently optimal and the backdrop didn't include things like kitchen doors or abandoned meatball plates. She had her camera ready, her lights positioned just right, and that professional smile that said, "I'm going to make you all look amazing even if it kills me." "Family only for this first set," she announced cheerfully, gesturing for people to gather. "We'll do extended family and friends afterward, but let's start with the immediate family around our graduate." I stood up automatically, my legs protesting after sitting in the folding chair of doom for the past hour, my butt completely numb and possibly permanently deformed from the metal seat. Because here's the thing, I was family. Immediate family, actually. The most immediate you could get without being a parent or sibling. I was the husband, the spouse, the person who'd signed legal documents making me officially part of this clan, for better or worse, and tonight had definitely been showcasing the worse part of that equation. So yeah, I stood up, ready to join the family photo session like any normal husband would at his wife's graduation party. I made it approximately 3 steps before Claire turned around, spotted me approaching, and did something that I'm pretty sure violated several provisions of the Geneva Convention regarding cruel and unusual punishment. She smiled. That same sweet smile she'd given me when she told me to sit in the back. That smile that looked warm and loving to everyone watching, but had all the genuine affection of a snake evaluating its next meal, and held out her hand. But she wasn't reaching for me. She was holding something. The camera. "Liam," she said, her voice carrying across the space between us with perfect clarity. "Can you take the photo?" Time did that weird thing where it simultaneously stops completely and speeds up exponentially. I stood there, frozen mid-step like a character in a movie who'd just been paused, my brain trying to process what had just happened while everyone around me watched with varying degrees of interest and amusement. "Can you take the photo?" Not "come join us for the photo." Not "let's get you in the shot." Not even "we'll do one with you after." Just, "can you take the photo?" Like I was the hired help. Like I was literally the photographer's assistant, some random guy they'd pulled in off the street to handle the camera so the actual photographer could, I don't know, take a break? Check her email? Contemplate the meaninglessness of existence? The photographer looked confused, glancing between Claire and me like she was trying to understand why the graduate was handing off her very expensive camera to some random guest. "Oh, I can handle the photos," she said politely, probably thinking Claire had misunderstood how professional photography works. "That's what I'm here for." "I know," Claire said, still smiling, still holding out the camera toward me like it was a perfectly reasonable request. "But Liam has such a good eye for composition. Don't you, honey?" She said, honey, the way you'd say unfortunate obligation or persistent rash. "He'll get some great candid shots from a different angle. You know, something more personal than the professional ones." There it was. The justification. The excuse that made it sound like she was actually giving me an honor, a special role in the festivities, rather than what it actually was, the final nail in the coffin of my dignity. She'd found a way to exclude me from the family photos while making it sound like a privilege, like I should be grateful for the opportunity to document everyone else's happiness from behind a lens while I remained conspicuously absent from every single image. The photographer, bless her heart, still looked uncertain. She glanced at me, then back at her camera, probably doing some mental calculation about liability and equipment insurance, and whether she was actually supposed to hand her professional gear over to someone who might drop it. But Claire was already pressing it into my hands, and what was I supposed to do? Refuse? Make a scene about wanting to be in the photos like some kind of attention-seeking child? Announce to everyone that my wife was deliberately excluding me from the family documentation of her biggest achievement? So I took the camera. It was heavy, professional, the kind of equipment that probably cost more than my car. My hands closed around it automatically, muscle memory from the countless times I'd been handed things at this party. Drinks, coats, questions about bathroom locations, and been expected to just deal with it without complaint. "Perfect," Claire said, already turning back to her family who were arranging themselves in the photographer's designated area. Her mother was fussing with her dress, her father was straightening his tie, Brandon was doing that thing where guys try to look casual and authoritative at the same time, usually by crossing their arms or putting one hand in their pocket. Grandma Constance had been escorted over from her throne and was being positioned in the center, the matriarch around whom everyone else would orbit. Even Biscuit the dog was being brought into the shot, held by Patricia like he was a furry accessory that completed the family portrait. I stood there holding the camera, and I swear I could feel every eye in that ballroom on me. Not overtly. People weren't stopping their conversations to stare, but I could sense the peripheral awareness, the sideways glances, the barely suppressed smirks. There was the husband, relegated to photographer duty at his own wife's party, taking pictures of the family that clearly didn't consider him part of the family. It was almost impressive in its cruelty, really. Claire had managed to find a way to make me present but invisible, involved but excluded, technically participating while being fundamentally rejected. The actual photographer stepped aside, though she stayed close enough to provide guidance, probably because she was worried I'd somehow break her camera or accidentally delete all the previous shots. "Just point and shoot," she said kindly, which was either genuinely helpful advice or the most condescending thing anyone had said to me all night. And considering the competition, that was really saying something. "The settings are all automatic, so just focus on composition and timing." I raised the camera to my eye, looking through the viewfinder at the Sullivan family arranged in perfect formation. They looked good. Of course they looked good. They were genetically incapable of looking bad. Plus, they'd probably practiced these poses in mirrors their entire lives. The lighting was perfect, catching the gold tones in the room and making everyone look like they were starring in their own personal Renaissance painting. Claire stood in the center with her parents flanking her, her diploma held proudly, her smile absolutely radiant. Brandon stood slightly behind, one hand on his father's shoulder in a gesture that screamed successful family. Grandma Constance sat regally in front, and even the damn dog looked photogenic. "Okay, everyone." Big smiles. I called out, and I have to give myself credit. My voice didn't crack, didn't waver, didn't betray even a hint of the absolute soul-crushing humiliation I was experiencing. I could have won an Oscar for that performance alone. Say Harvard Law. They all laughed. Genuine, happy laughter. And I started taking photos. Click, click, click. Each one perfect. Each one capturing their joy and pride and success. Each one a testament to Claire's achievement and the Sullivan family legacy. I moved around slightly, getting different angles like I actually knew what I was doing, trying to channel whatever photography skills I might have absorbed from occasionally browsing Instagram. The actual photographer stood nearby, nodding approvingly, apparently satisfied that I wasn't going to drop her equipment or accidentally expose the film. Wait, do digital cameras have film? See, I didn't even know, but I was out here acting like Annie Leibovitz anyway. Beautiful, the photographer said. Get a few more with just Claire and her parents. Those will be lovely for framing. So I did. Claire with her parents, all three of them beaming, Richard's hand on her shoulder, Patricia's arm around her waist. The perfect nuclear family, the successful daughter flanked by proud parents, everyone dressed impeccably and smiling like they'd never experienced a negative emotion in their entire lives. Click, click, click. I was creating memories, documenting this milestone, being helpful and supportive and exactly what everyone expected me to be. And I wasn't in a single one of them. Not one photo would show me. Not one image would provide evidence that I'd been there, that I'd witnessed this moment, that I had any connection to the woman at the center of all this celebration. Years from now, when Claire showed these photos to people, when they ended up in albums or frames or digital slideshows at future family events, I would be completely absent. The invisible husband, erased from the visual record of his wife's greatest achievement. You should be a professional photographer, Claire's aunt said as I was reviewing the shots on the camera's display screen, making sure they were all properly exposed and in focus like I was actually qualified to make that determination. She said it in that tone people use when they're trying to give you a compliment, but it comes out sounding vaguely insulting, like, oh, you're good at this menial task. Maybe you should make a career out of it instead of whatever unimpressive thing you currently do. I looked up at her and grinned. Actually grinned, like I found the comment amusing rather than soul-destroying. Too bad I'm stuck saving the country instead, I said, the sarcasm so thick you could have cut it with a knife, served it on a plate, and charged $30 for it at this venue. I was still holding the photographer's camera, still standing there like some kind of discount wedding photographer who'd accidentally wandered into a high society event when I felt it. You know that sensation you get when someone's watching you? That prickle on the back of your neck, that subtle shift in the air pressure, that animal instinct buried deep in your brain stem that's been keeping humans alive since we were running from predators on the savannah? Yeah, that kicked in hard, and every hair on my arm stood up like tiny soldiers coming to attention. The thing is, after 5 years of working in my particular field, you develop a sixth sense for certain presences. It's not supernatural or anything. It's just pattern recognition, your brain picking up on subtle cues that most people miss because they're not trained to look for them. The way someone stands with their weight distributed evenly on both feet, ready to move in any direction at a moment's notice. The way their eyes never stop scanning a room, cataloging exits and potential threats with mechanical efficiency. The way they move through a crowd without really touching anyone, gliding through spaces that seem too small, like they've calculated the exact trajectory needed to avoid all contact. The way their suits fit just a little too perfectly in the shoulders, accommodating things that normal suit jackets don't need to accommodate. I turned slowly, still clutching the camera like it was a shield or maybe a weapon, neither of which it would be particularly effective as, but my hands needed something to hold on to. And there they were, standing just inside the ballroom entranced like they'd materialized out of thin air, though I knew they'd probably been conducting a security sweep of the venue for the past few minutes, while everyone else was too drunk on champagne and self-importance to notice. 2 men in suits. Not just any suits, the kind of suits that scream federal government, but whisper it very, very quietly. Dark, perfectly tailored, conservative enough to blend in at a funeral or a Fortune 500 board meeting, but clearly designed for function over fashion. Their ties were tied with the kind of precision that suggested muscle memory from doing it the same way every single day for years. Their shoes were polished to a mirror shine, but practical, the kind you could run in if necessary, which was unfortunately necessary more often than most people would believe. But it was their presence that really sold it. These guys moved with the kind of purposeful calm that comes from knowing you're the most dangerous person in any given room and not needing to advertise that fact. They had that distinctive Secret Service energy, alert but not anxious, aware but not paranoid, ready for absolutely anything while appearing completely relaxed. It's a very specific vibe that you can't fake, no matter how many times you watch action movies or play dress up. They both wore earpieces, those flesh-colored coiled wire ones that probably cost more than the average person's monthly salary, and were definitely transmitting encrypted communications that normal radios couldn't intercept. Their eyes were scanning the room with that trademark Secret Service sweep. Constant motion, cataloging every face, every exit, every potential threat, running through scenarios and contingencies faster than a supercomputer playing chess. The music seemed to slow down. Maybe the DJ actually turned it down, or maybe it was just my perception warping as adrenaline started flooding my system and my brain kicked into a different gear entirely. The laughter that had been echoing through the ballroom like someone had installed surround sound speakers dedicated entirely to the Sullivan family's amusement started to die out, replaced by confused murmurs and the kind of silence that happens when something unexpected crashes into normalcy, like a meteor hitting a suburban neighborhood. People stopped mid-conversation, champagne flutes frozen halfway to lips, hors d'oeuvres suspended in that awkward space between plate and mouth. Heads turned, eyes widened, because even civilians who'd never been within 100 miles of anything requiring Secret Service protection could recognize these guys for what they were. It's hardwired into Americans at this point. We see those suits, those earpieces, that particular brand of controlled intensity, and our brains immediately supply. Federal agents, probably Secret Service, which means something important is happening right now. Claire's champagne glass. Expensive crystal, probably imported from someplace in France that charged by the syllable in their name, froze halfway to her lips. Her mouth was slightly open, caught mid-laugh from something someone had just said, and she looked like a character in a movie who'd just been paused at an unflattering moment. Her eyes were wide, darting between the two agents and then around the room like she was trying to figure out if this was happening at her party specifically or if maybe they were lost, looking for a different event entirely, possibly one that actually warranted Secret Service presence. Her father's face went from its usual, slightly smug expression, the default setting for Richard Sullivan III when he was holding court at family events, to something approaching concern, or maybe confusion, or possibly that look people get when they realize they might be in trouble but aren't sure what they did wrong yet. His hand tightened on his whiskey glass hard enough that I briefly worried he might shatter it, which would have been dramatic, but also probably expensive given the Sullivan family's commitment to only using glassware that costs more than reasonable people spend on electronics. Patricia actually gasped, an audible, theatrical gasp that would have been at home in a Victorian novel where ladies clutched their pearls and fainted onto conveniently placed fainting couches. Her hand went to her throat in that universal gesture of shock and possibly mild panic, her perfectly manicured nails looking stark against her skin. Brandon stopped mid-conversation with whatever lawyer he'd been impressing with his private equity stories, his mouth hanging open slightly in a way that definitely wasn't attractive and definitely wasn't the confident Sullivan brother persona he'd been working so hard to project all evening. The younger agent. I pegged him at maybe 28, 30 tops, with that clean-cut intensity that suggested he was relatively new to the Secret Service, but had already seen some things that would give normal people nightmares for years, stepped forward first. His movements were economical, efficient, no wasted motion. He wasn't being aggressive, but he also wasn't asking permission. This wasn't a request. This was an operation, and operations have protocols that don't pause for champagne-drunk lawyers trying to figure out what's happening. "Excuse me, sir," he said, his voice cutting through the awkward silence with the kind of clarity that comes from vocal training specifically designed to be heard and understood in chaotic situations. He was looking directly at me, not at Richard Sullivan or Brandon or any of the other men in suits who probably assumed federal agents would naturally gravitate toward them. No, his eyes were locked on me, specifically me, the guy standing there holding a camera and looking like he'd been hired for the evening to document everyone else's success. "We need to relocate you to your vehicle. Now." The now wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't negotiable either. It was the verbal equivalent of a door that only opened one way, and that way was immediately. His hand moved subtly toward his jacket, not threatening, just positioning, just making sure he had access to whatever he needed to have access to if this situation went sideways, which it probably wouldn't, but you never knew. which was exactly why Secret Service agents never assumed anything. The second agent, older, probably early 40s, with the kind of weathered look that suggested he'd been doing this job long enough to have stories he'd never tell and scars he'd never explain, had already moved to a position that gave him a clear line of sight to both me and the rest of the room. He wasn't pointing a weapon or even touching one, but his posture made it very clear that if anyone decided to interfere with whatever was about to happen, they would regret that decision very quickly and very thoroughly. Relocate me? To my vehicle? I watched the words process through the room like a computer virus spreading through a network. Everyone blinked in unison, like someone had synchronized their confusion. Relocate me? Why would Secret Service agents need to relocate me? I was nobody. I was just Liam, the husband who worked in administration, the guy who did paperwork, the invisible furniture who'd spent the entire evening sitting in the back and taking photos of the people who actually mattered. Except suddenly, inexplicably, impossibly, I was the person in the room that Secret Service agents had come to retrieve. Not Claire, the Harvard Law graduate. Not Richard Sullivan III, the senior partner at a major law firm. Not any of the wealthy, connected, important people who filled this ballroom. Me, the back row husband, the guy with the folding chair and the cold meatballs. Claire's champagne glass slipped slightly in her hand, threatening to spill, but not quite making it all the way to disaster. Her face had gone pale under her professional makeup, which honestly was impressive because she'd probably spent 2 hours getting that makeup perfect, and it was designed to withstand nuclear fallout, and yet somehow shock was breaking through it anyway. Her eyes were locked on me, but not with recognition or understanding. More like she was looking at a stranger, someone who'd been wearing my face all evening, but was now revealing themselves to be someone completely different. Her mother's mouth was hanging open in a way that Patricia would probably be mortified about later when she remembered that she'd lost her composure at a social event. Her father had gone completely still, which was unsettling because Richard Sullivan III was never still. He was always gesturing, always moving, always commanding attention through sheer force of animated presence. Brandon looked like someone had just explained quantum physics to him using nothing but interpretive dance, confused, overwhelmed, and not at all sure how to process what he was seeing. The room had gone dead silent except for the DJ's music, which was still playing in the background like nothing weird was happening, providing the world's most inappropriate soundtrack to whatever the hell this moment was turning into. Someone's phone camera clicked, probably trying to capture this for Instagram, because nothing says great party content like Secret Service agents showing up unexpectedly, and the younger agent's eyes flicked toward the sound with the kind of attention that suggested photos of this situation were probably not going to be allowed to exist for very long. Suddenly, the back row husband wasn't in the back row anymore. Suddenly, I was center stage, spotlit by confusion and champagne-impaired curiosity, with 2 Secret Service agents treating me like I was someone who mattered enough to relocate with urgency. And the best part? Everyone who'd spent the entire evening treating me like I was basically invisible was now staring at me like I'd just grown a second head or possibly sprouted wings. Just when I thought the evening couldn't get any more surreal. And believe me, the bar for surreal had already been set pretty damn high after spending hours being treated like catering staff at my own wife's party. A third agent materialized from the entrance. And I mean materialized, because I swear he wasn't there 1 second, and then suddenly he was, like he'd been beamed down from the Enterprise, or had just been really good at blending into the wallpaper until the exact moment his presence was required. This guy was different from the first 2. Older, maybe late 40s or early 50s, with salt and pepper hair that was cut with military precision and eyes that had seen some serious things, the kind of things that probably showed up in his dreams uninvited and stayed for breakfast. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd been doing this job since before half the people in this room were born, someone who'd probably protected multiple presidents and had stories that would be classified for the next 75 years. His suit was the same government-issue dark perfection as the others, but he wore it with the ease of someone who'd spent more time in tactical gear than formal wear and didn't particularly care about impressing anyone with his fashion choices. But what really caught everyone's attention, and I mean everyone, because the entire ballroom had gone so quiet you could have heard a champagne bubble pop, was what he was carrying. A leather folder. Not just any leather folder, but the kind that practically screamed important government documents. Do not fold, spindle, or mutilate. It was dark brown, expensive-looking leather that had been conditioned and maintained with the kind of care usually reserved for vintage cars or family heirlooms. The corners were reinforced with what looked like brass fittings, and the edges were perfectly straight, geometrically precise in a way that suggested this folder had never been casually tossed onto a desk or shoved into a briefcase. And embossed on the front, catching the ballroom's golden light and throwing it back like a challenge, was a seal. Not just any seal. The seal. The one that every American could recognize from birth. The one that showed up on official documents and presidential podiums, and the kinds of things that end up in history books. The presidential seal of the United States of America. That eagle with its arrows and olive branches, surrounded by stars, and that Latin phrase that I'd learned in high school and promptly forgotten, but which definitely translated to something important and official. The folder looked heavy, substantial, the kind of weight that comes from paper stock that costs more per sheet than most people spend on entire reams. You could tell just by looking at it that whatever was inside wasn't your standard office memo about the coffee machine being broken or reminders to submit your timesheet by Friday. This was the kind of folder that contained information that could change lives, alter policies, or possibly start, or prevent, international incidents. The agent approached me with measured steps, his shoes making soft clicks against the ballroom's marble floor that somehow seemed louder than they should have been in the suffocating silence. Everyone in the room was watching him move like he was carrying the nuclear football or possibly the original Declaration of Independence. Claire's uncle, Douglas or Daniel or whatever his name was, actually leaned forward slightly, like he was trying to get a better look at the seal, maybe verify it was real, maybe just trying to understand what the hell was happening at what was supposed to be a simple graduation party. The agent stopped directly in front of me, close enough that I could see the tiny American flag pin on his lapel and smell the faint scent of coffee and determination that seemed to emanate from all career Secret Service agents. His eyes met mine, and there was something in them, recognition, maybe respect, definitely professionalism, that made it very clear this wasn't a mistake, wasn't a case of confused identity, wasn't someone showing up at the wrong venue looking for a different Liam entirely. He held out the folder with both hands, a gesture that was somehow both casual and ceremonial, like he was presenting a diploma or possibly a weapon. "Your briefing materials, sir," he said, his voice pitched low enough that it wouldn't carry to the entire room, but loud enough that everyone in the immediate vicinity, which, given how silent and attentive the room had become, was basically everyone, could hear him clearly. "The president wants your assessment before tonight's cabinet meeting. The president wants my assessment before tonight's cabinet meeting." Those words hung in the air like smoke from a firework, visible and impossible to ignore and absolutely explosive in their implications. I watched them land on the crowd like physical objects, watched faces process the information in real time, watched brains try to reconcile what they'd just heard with everything they thought they knew about me, about the world, about how reality was supposed to work. The folder settled into my hands with satisfying weight. I wasn't even conscious of reaching for it. My body moved on autopilot, muscle memory from countless other times I'd received classified materials, accepted briefing documents, taken possession of information that most people would never know existed. The leather was smooth under my fingers, expensive and well-maintained, and through it I could feel the thickness of documents inside, the density of papers that probably had classification stamps on every page and would make about 17 different federal agencies very nervous if they ended up in the wrong hands. The room went so silent that I swear I could hear people's hearts beating, or maybe that was just my own pulse thundering in my ears like a timpani section warming up for a symphony. It was the kind of silence that happens right before something massive, right before a verdict in a murder trial, right before a proposal at a restaurant, right before a car crash that you can see coming but can't prevent. And then, like a marionette whose strings had been suddenly cut, Claire's diploma slipped from her hands. She'd been holding it this entire time, clutching it like a talisman or a shield, that expensive piece of parchment with Harvard's seal and her name in Latin that she'd worked 3 years to earn, and she just let it go. It hit the floor with a soft thump that seemed deafening in the silence. the leather cover making contact with the marble in a way that would probably leave a mark, possibly bend a corner, definitely diminish the pristine perfection she'd been maintaining all evening. Nobody moved to pick it up. Not Claire, not her parents, not any of the hovering relatives who'd spent the entire evening treating that diploma like it was the Holy Grail. They just stared. At me, at the folder, at the presidential seal catching the light like a beacon, at this impossible situation that had crashed into their carefully orchestrated celebration like a meteor hitting a garden party. Claire's mother gasped again, her second gasp of the evening, and this one was even more dramatic than the first, the kind of sound you make when you witness something that fundamentally breaks your understanding of reality. Her hand went to her chest, fingers splayed wide like she was checking to make sure her heart was still beating, like she needed physical confirmation that she was still alive and this was actually happening. Her father, Richard Sullivan III, senior partner, master of his domain, man who commanded rooms with his presence alone, choked. Actually choked. On his whiskey. That expensive single malt that he'd been sipping all evening while holding court about legal strategy and billable hours just went down the wrong pipe. And suddenly, he was coughing and sputtering like a freshman at his first college party who'd overestimated his alcohol tolerance. Patricia had to pat him on the back, which would have been funny under different circumstances, but right now just added to the surreal tableau of the Sullivan family collectively losing their composure. Brandon's mouth was hanging open so wide that I could practically see his uvula. All that confidence, all that swagger, all that Sullivan superiority had evaporated like water on hot asphalt, leaving behind just a confused guy in an expensive suit trying to understand how the world had turned upside down in approximately 30 seconds. I looked around at their stunned faces, Claire's pale shock, her mother's theatrical dismay, her father's red-faced confusion, Brandon's slack-jawed disbelief, the relatives and friends frozen in various states of champagne-impaired bewilderment. All these people who'd spent the entire evening making sure I knew exactly where I ranked in their hierarchy, who'd relegated me to the back row with my folding chair and cold meatballs, who'd laughed when Brandon roasted me and nodded approvingly when Claire handed me the camera instead of including me in photos. All these people who thought they knew me, who'd decided years ago that I was nobody important, nobody worth acknowledging, nobody who deserved a seat at the table or a place in the family photos. All these people who'd seen administration and paperwork and concluded that I was basically a glorified secretary, someone who pushed papers around a desk somewhere forgettable and lived a small, boring, inconsequential life. And I almost said it. I almost went with something sarcastic and biting, something that would cut deep and make them feel exactly how they'd been making me feel all evening. Guess my paperwork does matter after all, was right there on the tip of my tongue, ready to be deployed like a verbal missile. But you know what? They didn't deserve my sarcasm. They didn't deserve the satisfaction of knowing they'd gotten to me, that their treatment had hurt, that I'd been keeping score all evening of every slight and insult and casual cruelty. They didn't deserve anything from me except the truth, delivered with the kind of calm professionalism that I used when briefing actual important people on actual important matters. So instead, I looked around at their stunned faces and said, "Yeah, about that administrative work." I paused, letting them absorb it, watching their faces as their brains tried to process where this was going. Turns out my paperwork is classified at the highest level. I don't staple memos. Another pause, this one for dramatic effect, because if I was going to blow up their entire understanding of reality, I might as well make it memorable. I stop international crises. The silence somehow got even more silent, which shouldn't have been physically possible, but apparently was. It was like the room had been vacuum sealed, all the air sucked out, leaving behind just shocked faces and the distant sound of the DJ's music still playing because nobody had thought to tell him to stop. Claire's uncle, definitely Douglas, I decided, blinked rapidly like he was trying to clear his vision, like maybe if he blinked enough times the scene in front of him would reset to something that made sense. "Wait," he said, his voice cracking slightly on the word. "You work for?" I looked directly at him, then let my gaze sweep across the entire room, making eye contact with as many people as possible, making sure they all heard this, all understood exactly what they'd missed, exactly who they'd been dismissing all evening. "The president," I said, my voice calm and casual, like I was admitting I played in a garage band on weekends or had a mild interest in craft beer. The President of the United States. Her mom's jaw dropped so far I genuinely worried about her dental work. Like, I'm talking unhinged in a way that would have made her orthodontist weep and possibly recommend some kind of supportive apparatus. Her perfectly painted lips formed a perfect O of shock, and her eyes went wider than I'd ever seen them, which was saying something because Patricia Sullivan was generally pretty good at maintaining her composed country club expression regardless of circumstances. But apparently, my son-in-law works for the president was beyond her emotional management capabilities. My wife turned pale, and I mean really pale, like someone had literally drained the color from her face with a shop vac. All that expensive makeup, all those carefully applied layers of foundation and contour, and whatever else she'd spent 2 hours putting on this morning, couldn't hide the fact that the blood had completely evacuated from her face in sheer shock. She looked like she'd seen a ghost, or possibly like she was becoming a ghost, transitioning from living human to spectral entity right there in the middle of her own graduation party. Suddenly, I wasn't the invisible husband anymore. I wasn't the guy in the back with the folding chair and the abandoned meatballs. I wasn't the forgettable spouse who worked in administration or something and could be safely ignored at family gatherings. I was the headline. I was the story. I was the person every single eye in that ballroom was locked onto, like I'd just announced I was secretly Superman and was about to fly through the ceiling. The transformation in the room was instantaneous and almost physically tangible, like someone had flipped a switch that changed the entire atmosphere from polite dismissal to holy crap, we need to pay attention now. People who'd looked through me all evening were suddenly seeing me, really seeing me, for the first time. And the looks on their faces? Priceless. Absolutely priceless. Agent Rodriguez stepped closer, his presence commanding immediate attention. Sir, we need to move now. His tone was professional but urgent, the kind that suggested this wasn't a suggestion. It was a security protocol, and security protocols didn't pause for family drama or convenient timing. Of course, I said, standing up straighter, letting the leather folder rest comfortably in my hands like I'd done this 1,000 times before, which, honestly, I had. Just never at my wife's graduation party with 200 witnesses watching. Family, it's been a blast. Really memorable evening. I looked around at all those shocked faces one more time, savoring the moment. Please enjoy the rest of the party. And seriously, try the meatballs on the left side of that plate. They're slightly less chewy than the ones on the right. Trust me on this. I've had plenty of time to conduct a thorough analysis. As I walked toward the exit with the agents flanking me like a presidential escort, the room absolutely erupted. Not with applause, with whispers, gasps, and the unmistakable sound of dozens of phones being pulled out simultaneously. Camera flashes started going off like we were at a red carpet premiere, everyone desperate to document this moment, to capture evidence that this had actually happened. Behind me, I could hear Claire's heels clicking frantically against the marble floor as she stumbled after us, her coordination clearly affected by champagne and shock. Inside the SUV, the leather seats were infinitely more comfortable than that damn folding chair. The door closed with that satisfying thunk that only expensive vehicles make, sealing me in climate-controlled silence while chaos erupted outside. My phone buzzed immediately, my actual work phone, the encrypted one that only a handful of people had access to. ETA to Air Force Jet, 15 minutes. Cabinet meeting moved to 6 o'clock. Your briefing is first. My assistant texted with characteristic efficiency. I rolled down the window slightly, just enough to see Claire standing on the steps of the venue, frozen like a statue. Her diploma was still on the floor inside somewhere, forgotten in the chaos. Her perfectly styled hair was slightly disheveled from her frantic attempt to catch up with me, and her expression was a mixture of shock, confusion, and something that might have been regret if I was being generous. Congratulations again, darling. I called out, keeping my voice cheerful and casual like we were having a normal married couple conversation and not a life-altering moment of truth. I'm sure you'll do great at Dad's firm. Really make a name for yourself. I paused, letting that sink in before delivering the final line. Maybe someday you'll represent clients as important as the ones I brief every day. As the motorcade pulled away, because of course it was a motorcade, complete with lead vehicles and trail cars, I leaned back against the headrest and actually laughed.